Life without a camera for me would be like life without breathing. That's the way that I connect. I always thought about cameras from the time I actually can remember. A camera is, to me, the tool by which I'm able to express myself. When you find a tool which in fact can become a body part, that you are free to really access your creativity. I'm very clear that my photography is part of what makes me know who I am. It's my journey. For me, who am I, who are you? The answers have always been found by making still photographs. In the days of film, it was rare that I could just go out with one camera because, first of all, sometimes you want to shoot in black and white, sometimes you want to shoot in color, sometimes you want one roll to be a higher ISO than another roll. Oftentimes, I was out there with approximately 5 camera bodies all around my neck. In those days, when I wanted to get from camera to camera and I was in a hurry, I would throw the camera around my neck. Nowadays, you know, with digital, I'm able to, with just one camera, be able to accomplish all the things that I used to sometimes need 3, 4, 5 cameras for. When I used film, there were certain limiting factors that made me work harder to find how I could use light to create what was in my head. It's far easier to do that with digital and to go much, much further. In my working with the DF, what is exceptional is the fact that you can work at very high ISOs. You've got the freedom carrying that camera around with you to go into extremely low-lit situations and to make an image. This is my very, very old film camera. I'm not even quite sure what year this FE2 is from, but it's been through the war. And then, of course, this is the DF. It just kind of takes me back. It looks so much like what was so important to me at a particular time in my life. It's for a kind of love that one might have had with their film camera. It can now be transferred to the digital world. In walking around with my DF, I saw this little store between 2 buildings, and I started talking to the gentleman whose store it was. He's had this store for 34 years. Right next to the store is this mural, and he then pointed out to me that he, in fact, is the horn player in the mural. Photography can enrich and expand not only who we are as people, but our connections to each other. I have been a photographer for over 40 years, and I've always used Nikon.
If you view your life as a piece of fabric or a tapestry, the photography is the stitching. It keeps everything together. It gives me, impetus to express myself, to communicate. I was not destined to be a photographer. I was in school to be a writer until I was required to take this photography class, and I borrowed my father's old camera. I just started making pictures with it, and I think I thought 2 things. I think this whole endeavor felt really natural and a good expression for my imagination. And secondarily, I thought to myself, this could keep me out of an office. I work really, really hard when I'm in the field. I figure things out. I'm not some technical virtuosos kind of out there like, okay, well, give me God's light over here. And it ain't like that. There are pictures in my career that I have shot that one frame required 5 days. I bought my first Nikon camera in 1973. My professor in school told me, he said, buy a Nikkor mat. It's a poor man's F2. Okay? And I was definitely a poor man at the time. So I scraped together some dough and I bought a Nikkor mat and a 50mm lens. You grow up with a camera. It's almost like having a childhood friend or something. I think, without getting too crazy about it, it's a little bit of a part of your personality as well. These photographs represent, a departure for me, certainly the beginning of an adventure. It was my first major story for National Geographic. They sent me to Chihuahua in Mexico. There's a legendary train that runs from the coast into the interior called the Copper Canyon train run. Very rugged terrain and just a beautiful rustic piece of Mexico. These pictures were made on film, wandering the streets. And now, all these years later, I'm wandering the streets of Mexico with a DF, which is, this, as I say, interesting continuum or amalgam of the way I shot here and the machinery I shot here, and now, of course, the advanced technology of digital. I made a transition from being a film photographer to a digital photographer seamlessly. I shot the first all-digital story for the National Geographic. In the history of the magazine, it's the first time they ever did not use a single frame of film. I didn't know much about digital. All I knew was a camera was in my hands. I didn't much care what was going on inside of it, but it felt the same. It felt fast, it felt responsive, and I put my film camera down, I picked up a digital camera, and all of a sudden I was a digital photographer. The DF is a wonderful and imaginative blend of old and new. When I got it to a pretty stressful situation, I was photographing Mexican charros, who are these competitive cowboys. And I'm in an arena, it's full of dust, there's horses charging all over, and the camera is there in my hands, it's light, it's fast, it's tracking. The horses are charging directly at me, so I got a constantly changing plane of focus. So I was curious about that too, like, okay, is this relatively unobtrusive, light-ish camera going to keep up with me in the field, in the middle of all this dust and mayhem? And it did really well. So that was another, moment. I was like, okay, this is working. The camera itself has this wonderful homey feel, a familiar feel, and it has a kind of look to it that is classic, but it has a lot of the features of a cutting-edge digital camera. What makes a great photograph? A photograph that gets your attention. Emotionally, intellectually, pictorially, informationally. If you can make your photograph impart to it a simple fillip of difference that makes somebody just blink twice, then you've done your job as a photographer.